All right, let's begin here. Economic freedom fighters leader Julius Malema remains defiant and says he will challenge his conviction in the firearm discharge trial. Addressing supporters in East London, in the Eastern Cape, Malema announced plans to approach the Supreme Court of Appeal immediately after his sentencing on the 23rd of January 2026. The East London Magistrates Court found him guilty on 5 counts under the Firearms Control Act. The charges stem from a 2018 incident during the EFF's 5th anniversary rally at Sisa Dukashe Stadium in Mdantsane.
We are going to fight this up until the Constitutional Court. We are coming on the 23rd of January for sentencing, and after sentencing, we will immediately put an appeal so that we can go to the higher court, because we think a judgment is faulty. The strategy has always been, you must try to charge Malema with everything. One day, maybe we'll find a racist judge who will find him guilty, whether he's guilty or not. Because they said accused number 2 gave me the firearm. Now they are releasing him, which means he didn't give me the firearm. Why are you not releasing me? When you release a person you allege gave me the firearm. By releasing accused number 2, the whole case should have collapsed.
All right, we've now roped in a political analyst, Professor Sipho Seepe, as we look at implications of this particular judgment to the EFF. Prof, a very good afternoon to you, and thank you so much for your time. What is the broader political significance of this guilty verdict for Julius Malema as the leader of the EFF, especially when you consider that this guilty verdict also landed at a time when the EFF is positioning itself ahead of the local government elections next year?
At the moment, it's still early to indicate which way, but you can rest assured that the opposition parties are going to be celebrating this moment, and they're going to use it to try to undermine the EFF politically. But at the same time, one must also understand that what Malema has also done is also to present this as nothing but a political witch hunt. And he has already laid almost an argument of appeal to say what you have in this case is that if he is guilty, surely somebody who was his bodyguard, the person who gave him the gun that is accused of having had the one of unlawful possession of a firearm, that person should also have been convicted, especially, or been found guilty, especially given that that person gave a firearm to somebody who may not even have been very good at using the gun, because the person who was giving him the gun understand is a licensed person. So from that perspective, you could make a case of a bias. Why not include us where there is a commonality in the action that ultimately came out? And of course, the other issues of all other counts need to be something that you would have to look at. But what is important here is to indicate that Malema has already indicated that in this, is going to fight until up to the Constitutional Court. So we're still, it's still early, because the first thing that he needs to do is to ask the court for leave to appeal against the finding, being found guilty. But then there will also be issue around the sentencing. So it's still early and it's a long road. But he can use the notion that says there are other people who are found to be, who should have been charged for serious crimes. And this was at the rally, and there was no intention to harm anybody. But as I say, these are the issues that the judge felt that Malema did not do himself any good in the manner in which he had responded. That some of the responses were more flippant instead of him being very strong into saying either this is not the case or not. So and even that the judge made a mistake. When you make that comment, you're already beginning to suggest that you are also irritated, and that could also use as a base for a bias.
You're right with that last point, because I was going to just challenge on that point in terms of also, did he represent himself well enough? And you're also right, Prof, when you say that this is still a very long journey, given the sentiment that he will take it all the way to the Con Court. Not only did he call it a political witch hunt, as you say, he's also framed this case as a political and racial witch hunt. Could this narrative then, gain traction with his base, or do you think it will alienate some voters, perhaps? I know that it is early days, but everybody is campaigning now already around the 2026 local government elections. I mean, how do you see this playing out in as far as influencing voter perception?
Well, the voters are going to be influenced by a broader perspective. They are going to look at the nature of the seriousness of the alleged crime. And they are going to be looking at also evidence or instances where they feel that there are certain people who should have been charged and they have not been charged. If there is a clear understanding or portrait that emerges that says the NPA is inconsistent in the application of the law, then this inconsistency can be used in his favor to say, look at these instances that were more serious, more hazardous, and you see people not being charged. But you have a case where we were celebrating and there was no intention for me to harm anybody. And also, I was using a toy gun. Some people are going to believe his story about the toy gun. But this is where I think his defense failed, because what he needed to do is to make a case that his story or his version of what happened there is possibly true. But what the state was able to persuade the magistrate, is that our case, that this was not a toy gun but a real gun, is corroborated by the following things: the cartridges, and also the people who were brought in. The judge or magistrate went on to suggest that they were more credible and went on to actually praise them. So the issue here was really whose version is more credible and believable, because what you have here is one of those cases of the circumstantial evidence seems to suggest that this particular version is the one that is possibly true.
And before we look at, just some of the real consequences here, I want to stay on that point that you made about him perhaps also looking at the inconsistencies, just based on that statement that he made when he was addressing his supporters, vowing to fight all the way to the Constitutional Court. I mean, what does this then tell us about the party's long-term strategy in portraying certain institutions as biased against them?
Well, I mean, that's a challenge that we have seen with Madlanga Commission, that there have been suggestions that the entire criminal justice system has been infiltrated by not only politicians to get political favors, to shield certain people. And we've seen how certain law enforcement agencies, when it comes to certain people, they suddenly see nothing wrong, hear nothing wrong. But when it comes to some smaller issues, the very NPA seems to be very excited. I mean, if you take the case of Carl Niehaus, who was charged for violating COVID-19 regulations, and he had to spend a whole year on a case that was on a matter that many people were violating, including the politicians, and yet they were not being charged. That could be an instance of where you see the weaponization of the NPA. And these are the issues that the EFF is going to be putting across. But what they need to do, or what they will probably do, is simply to expose the inconsistencies and the biases in the system, and to say what is happening here is that I, representing the poorest of the poor, representing the marginalized, I'm being attacked. But this is nothing new. If you look at history as he has done, has put together to say, to be jailed for what you stand for and to die for what you stand, it's a badge of honor.
Yeah, and Prof, as I said, when you look at the Firearms Control Act, under which his charges emanate from, if Malema were at the end of this, of course, looking at worst case scenario, if Malema were sentenced to a minimum of 15 years, what would that mean then, for the EFF's leadership, dynamics and survival as this political force, and also, of course, his position when you look at from a parliament perspective?
Well, I mean, the law is very clear. If he's convicted and he has to spend more than a year in custody, then his leadership, he can no longer represent his party in parliament. But what it also means is that you may have certain conditions, and during that period of incarceration, they'll have to think about the next person to take over or the next court of leadership. But the EFF, if you've seen the many of the young people, they would that would not be too much of a problem. But it does would undermine the EFF because whether people like it or not, Malema is a force to reckon with. When he speaks, people see a person with credibility, a person who has gone through the challenges that ordinary people have actually gone through. So it will have that effect because you do need somebody who's credible to advance the mission that the EFF was set out to achieve. So that would be a setback, and I don't think the EFF does not understand that, and Malema himself understands that very fully. This is why they are not going to take this line down. They're going to fight it, and they're going to make sure that every loophole that could be found, they're going to exploit it.
Prof, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. Professor Sipho Seepe there for us, just looking at the implications following that verdict in the East London Magistrates Court.